A few reflections on Vittorio Sgarbi's Natal chart by Ciro Discepolo. I hadn't looked at it for decades and found it incredibly interesting for explaining once again some paradigms I believe should be considered fundamental within astrology. I'm referring especially to the Taurus values and the second eighth house dialectic. Perhaps just a year ago we wouldn't have understood or been able to objectively experience everything written in capital letters in this chart, which certainly corresponds to a great art critic whose life was, in my opinion, extremely interesting from an astrological perspective. Let's start with the Taurus values, a sign with three birth stars, the Sun, Venus, and Jupiter, but above all, four stars in co-significance, that is, in the second house. It is the domain of orality, almost in its archetypal sense. The orality of Taurus versus the anality of Scorpio, life and death, Eros and Thanatos, the desire to suck, to feed, versus the instinct for destruction, the expulsion of feces, the product of destruction and death. If we don't fully understand this dynamic, we can't grasp all the nuances of this and billions of other lives, past, present, and future. It's the orality of Giovanni Verga's stuff, and it's also the pathological avarice admirably described by Honoré de Balzac in Papa Grandet. The richest man in France who ordered no candles to be lit when night fell. It's difficult, almost impossible, to separate seemingly distant states of the human soul, such as avarice, greed, and the fear of remaining poor within the Taurus, Scorpio, and second house, eighth house dialectic, powerfully expressed here. Vittorio Sgarbi has managed to raise a lot of money, especially through art. Why art? Because we are in the Venusian sign par excellence, but also because we find three stars in Libra, the other Venusian sign, enormously connected to beauty, to art, but also because, as Lisa Morpurgo discovered, the second house, where Sgarbi has four birth stars, is the image, that which appears, and therefore also art, especially art, not to be confused with the site that is the heritage of the Pisces-Virgo axis and the 12th, 6th houses, as I discovered several decades ago. The stars certainly helped him greatly to become rich through art, if only we consider the close Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Taurus and the second house. But then, how can we explain the recent dramatic events in his life? Here the other values of the chart come into play, three stars, including Mars and Neptune, in the eighth house, money that is lost or could be lost. But also the very nature of Taurus, which I wrote about at the dawn of my first publications, which I considered the most fragile of all signs after Pisces, in my personal collection, even before the public and universal one. I have collected many Taurians suffering from severe anxiety and neuroses, many bordering on psychosis. Why? In my opinion, it's always because of that ancestral and innate fear of remaining poor, which drives them both to seek significant gains and to be stingy. Many are driven toward homosexuality, especially males, because it runs very parallel to the aforementioned orality, which also causes the most serious pathologies for these natives. Persistent throat and tonsil problems, anorexia or obesity, often alternating thyroid conditions, throat cancer in the most serious cases. Now let's look closer at the facts concerning the subject. I'll start by saying that I can't swear by them, but they clearly seem to me to be exactly what I'm about to describe. The fear of losing money and capital was perhaps the reason why the former center-right politician never married Sabrina Colle, his partner of many years, At this point, however, his poor birth positions in the 8th house, and also in the 7th, Neptune and Saturn, were or are about to hit him hard due to the action brought by his daughter Evelina, who has filed a lawsuit to have him appointed as support administrator, a fancy way of saying interdict. And here's a new and recent twist. Vittorio Sgarbi suddenly decides to marry his partner, the charming Sabrina Coley, I believe, primarily to prevent anyone from disqualifying him and taking away his assets. But can you imagine within these stars the hell the subject has been experiencing these past months? And of course the solar return currently underway, likely drawn for Rome, is incredibly illuminating. An ascendant in the 8th house, the money he could lose. Mars dominant on the midheaven, a forced and hard-fought emancipation, the entire sky divided between the 5th and 7th houses, his daughter with Saturn, Neptune, and Venus in the 5th, which the writer definitely connects with his wife as well, and the sudden decision to marry Sun and Uranus in the 7th house. Could it be clearer than that? Here, then, is yet another example that always pushes us to put ourselves in other people's shoes, even if we think the opposite of them. The